to a scene. The next example I like a lot, because this is where we really get into the creativity in Flame and why artists like working here, how you can really quickly come in and start experimenting and working not just in 2D, not just in X and Y, but also expanding that out into a true 3D workspace.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to use the timeline as a great organizational tool. I want to work on this shot, but let's say I don't really want to work directly on this segment. I may want to do different versions. So what I'll do this time is work vertically by copying up the base layer above, and working on this layer will allow me to always go back to the original if I need to. So I'll just sort of copy that up and go back into the batch effects to start creating a composite. Now, this particular wall shot, this is when the effect starts to write on and the guy steps back. It's not so easy just to go ahead and put the game footage into these kind of background
plates.
No,
there's always a lot of work that needs to happen. In fact, if you look at a typical spot, this kind of work happens on just about every scene. You're removing elements, you're covering up things, you're adding stuff into it. So
before you can even start a job like this, you really kind of have to kind of neutralize your imagery, right? We don't want to have this logo here and this writing. It's going to be distracting. There's too many windows on this wall. It's going to distract from the effect of the game footage writing on. So what we're going to do is go to the last frame where we have most of the building in our scene, and we're going to go to all the cool tools that we need here, like paint tools, for example. I can go into my paint tool, so of course I can paint directly on the image. But I can also do things like recursively clone parts of the image over other parts. So here I can start to paint out the sections that I want for my clean plate. So you can see it's very quick, interactive. Again, I can change the size of my brush and start to paint different areas out. Now, I'm not going to do the whole cleanup, but you get the idea of where we started and what we're doing. So let's get rid of the paint. Of course, for the demo, I have a single painted clean frame for that. So on the last frame, we have this particular still frame. Now we're going to incorporate that also using the action module that we saw before. So let's go to action. We'll add a media layer. We're going to go ahead and feed this into our action result. But before I do that, I'm going to actually use a garbage mask. So let me go in. I showed you the masking before, so I won't go through all of that again, but I'm just going to go in and load up a garbage mask, which will isolate a particular part of that image. So we're just going to take this section out, and we're going to track that over the writing that we saw on the wall. So let's go ahead and take that as the matte, and we'll take the original in as the front, and that's going to give us this layer that we can now start to have tracked against the back plate. Now I started on the last frame, so you can see it's not in sync with the rest of the sequence. So what I'm going to do is go to the schematic view, and I'm going to select the axis again, and go in and do a bit of motion tracking. So let's go into the stabilizer now. We'll do a 2-point track to calculate for the scaling of this shot as well. And this time notice that I'll be able to track in reverse because we are on the last frame. When I do the analysis, we can actually go in the other direction. So that's a great benefit as well. You can actually track in either direction. At this point, when we come back out, we're going to see that our image is now locked to the background plate. To make that a little more obvious, let me change the transfer mode so you can see exactly what we're doing. We're covering up that section of the original wall with our cleaned up and painted element, and again, we're using a garbage mask to get that to kind of sit in that scene. Now, we're doing a good job with that, but if you notice, this was shot on film, and if you start to take a still frame that's been painted and incorporate that over a moving film plate, you're not going to see any grain in that shot.
It's going to stand out. It's going to stand out. Your eye will be drawn to that.
So what's great about the software is we have not only these creative tools, but we have a lot of technical tools. So you might be able to just drop a regrain tool onto that particular still frame and just dial in some kind of a grain pattern. Now, if you know the type of film stock that was used, maybe 5245, you can just apply that specific grain to it, or you can customize that. You can sample parts of the image and get your own grain profile as needed. But that's going to make that not stand out so much from the background plate. All right, so we've got our cleaned up background. Now it's time to start incorporating that game footage. So I'm going to bring another media layer out, and we're going to go out to the desktop to go ahead and find our game footage. So I'm just going to go back out and get the game footage. And we'll go ahead and put the game footage in, but this time we want to color correct. So we saw masking, we've seen some tracking. Let's go ahead and look at the color correction tool. We've got this sort of bright game footage. It doesn't look anything like our background wall. So what I can do is sort of use the background wall as a reference now. What's great within the color correction tools is you have the ability to do splits. So this way I can really see what I'm doing here. I'm going to go in and just sort of desaturate this shot a lot, start to grade this more into the tonal range that we see in the background plate. And I can do that specifically for the midtones, the shadows, the highlights, and kind of create this sort of greenish cyan kind of look. Now once we've done that, let's feed that result into action. So back here in action now we've got our footage. Now if we turn the matte off and change the transparency a bit at first, you'll see that we still have an issue. Again, the game footage is static. We know that we've got a moving shot. So the great thing about the schematic view is in terms of organizing and managing all this information is I can simply draw a line down from the original tracking data, and now you'll see that that shot's been locked to the background plate. So we can, instead of having to redo the track every time, we just inherit that tracking information and apply it to whatever we need to in the schematic view. Now we also have the offset axis here. I can just move that down, and what's great again, very gestural, very visual, I can just position this exactly where I want it to go. So I want it to have like the base of the mountain here at the guy's feet, so that's where the guy's going to start running up the wall. Now this is tracked properly, but the image itself isn't in the right orientation to the background. And what's great about all of the surfaces within Action is I can change their properties and turn them into things that I can bend and I can move around like you would a geometric shape. So here I can actually start to sort of tweak that a little bit. You can see how important this might be if you were doing something like trying to replace a license plate in a scene or something like that. You can really get in and start to use these geometries to get that to work. So now we've got the shape of what we want for our wall. Now, let's look at another issue that we have, and if we go to the front view of that particular shot, it's in terms of timing. You can see that this little guy is supposed to be running up this wall in this scene, but he doesn't do that until much later in that sequence. So what we can do is we can slip that shot into place. We say, well, let's get him to just sort of jump over our guy, and then he's going to start into his whole sequence of running up the wall. So again, all the tools you need to get this done. Now, let's go back and turn the matte on for a second. I'm going to go ahead and reset the transparency on that particular layer because we want to do this reveal. That was the whole point of this spot, was revealing on the characters as they were breaking through the walls. So to do that, I'm going to use a different tool. We've shown the garbage masking. I can animate the garbage matte.
Yeah, this is a great way to kind of take some tools and start having fun with it. So you could use a garbage mask. Of course, you could use a shape. You saw that in some of the test footage, they use some ink drop patterns in water and some stock elements. But yeah, Flame comes with a lot of great presets and filters built right into it.
Yeah, and this is all about creative experimentation. I mean, that's what's great. When you have the speed and interactivity that we have in Flame, that gives us more time to try different things out. So what I might want to do is just pick out, let's just show you one, but here's an appropriate one if you're trying to get, something to be out of the barrel of a gun, right? So this is like a machine gun effect. Again, just an automatic effect. You might want to use that for something, saves the day in certain situations. In our case, though, I have one that I'm going to use here, which is going to be more of a based on a tornado effect. So this is kind of a tornado type effect, and we've got sort of something that looks like steam coming out of a light here. Now, I'm going to use that to reveal the game footage in action, but in order to get the placement exactly where I want for the effect, I'm going to use something called the 3D path. And the 3D path will allow me to actually hand draw on the screen in the direction that I want, a path that I can attach any object to. So in this case, we're now going to kind of outline the wall there, and you can see I can turn that off. Back here in the schematic view now, I'm just going to attach my effect to the 3D path, and then I'll just move the light over here and orient that toward the path, and you'll see that pretty quickly I'm able to get those particles to follow along that path. Now, here's the other thing I want to do. I'm going to sort of brighten this up a bit. Let's go in and intensify the light to kind of really create a good matte element. And then back here in our schematic, we're going to go ahead and replace the matte that we saw before with that. So here we go ahead, back to our scene on frame 1. We're going to see the effect start to happen. It's crawling up the wall, but it's not big enough. I want to make some adjustments to it. And again, this brings up another really good thing about doing procedural compositing. I want to affect what's going on down here in this particular matte that I'm creating, but I need to see what's going on up here. So let's go ahead and set a context. And when I split the views, and we'll do that 3 ways, what we're going to end up with is on the right we have our context view happening in our final composite. On the left I have the schematic of the previous action, and in the middle I have the result of that that stage of development of our mat. So this is what's great about procedural compositing. I can be working upstream from the final composite. Now I can go back and do things like adjust the spread of the light, adjust the particle emitter, we'll change the speed of the particles. You get the idea. Here I can start to really play around and tweak the effect and get exactly what I want with a combination of different steps all inside of the compositing area. So it's really a great and interactive way of solving that issue.
Now, up to this point, you've pretty much been working in a flat 2D world.
Exactly. We're doing a basic 2D composite so far. But what we want to do, we have the 3D particle system in the application, so we're going to take advantage of that because there was a lot of debris being knocked off the wall when the character started running up.
This is also a great example. I mean, if we want to incorporate these 3D elements, this is the paint chips, the debris coming off the wall as the footage crawls up. We don't want to have to go over to Roland and ask him to render that for us in Maya. That's going to take a long time. We want to sit in that room and either work fast, maybe we've got a client, maybe we're just trying to work fast and creatively, and we want to start experimenting with that. So what Bill's doing is essentially an edge detect on that particle effect, so you're reusing that data there. And now you're going to bring it in and use that as an emitter to create actual 3D particles.
Exactly. So we're going to bring that into our scene. Now the placement, again, can be helped out by attaching that to the tracking data, and again, we can come down and we can offset that using the localized axis. Now this is just a stand-in right now for where we want to place our particles, and we're going to use that surface to emit the particles. So you saw we have a lot of presets. In this case, what I want to do is create my own. So I'm going to just use, for now I'll use little spheres, and I'm going to create a much higher number of spheres, and you can see that they're interacting, they're basically being emitted off the surface. We can light the spheres, so I'm going to add a couple of lights into the scene. You can see they are 3D particles, so they're being affected by the lights. And I'm just going to go ahead and reposition my lights around. So here we got our first light, and it's going to be lighting everything. This light for the particles I can move. You can see it interacting with the particles here. I'm going to hide this surface because we don't need that anymore. And notice that the particles, because they're based on just the black and white image, don't have any color on them. I'm going to replace the color of that layer with our color correction that we did on the game footage, and now that's going to look a little bit more integrated into our scene.
So this is a great way. I mean, you see how fast Bill can work. You see that schematic coming together. It's really an artist's tool, kind of throwing all these pieces together. And I think you've actually got another one that you spent a little more time on and really...
Well, the last little bit of this is I just want to go ahead and add a little bit of a behavior on these particles. I can apply vortexes. I can apply gravity. Notice here I can start to scale the gravity. I can start to position it down where I want it to be. I can increase the magnitude, so I can really control those particles.
And this is really the advantage of having an interactive particle system that's in 3D right in your compositing environment, because these aren't just sort of flat, fake 3D particles. You can have these bounce off with things. You can have them interact with things within the composite.
Exactly. So that's basically how I got to my final result, which I'll just sort of pull out and show you what we've got here. This is really the example of...
It's one of these 15
one of these little nodes has my final wall. There he is. So let's go ahead and feed that into our result, and we'll just go ahead and show you with a little bit more time what this can look like. So I'm just going to go in and jump to the result here. You can see that I've set this up and offset the layers in 3D space so that when I start to move my camera around, you can really get the idea of the effect. And I've also incorporated into the scene a light. If I hide the icons for a second, there was a light here, so we could even go in and start to relight the scene and start to create a much more dramatic look. But that's the essential steps that went into building that effect.
Exactly. So you can see how fast Bill can take a shot, a complex shot, maybe a shot that has a real creative challenge, meaning he's got to come in and decide what that's going to look like. He's going to build that effect up while he's in the suite. Now, the problem is there are a lot more shots to do, and you've actually identified 2 shots. These are the next 2 we're going to look at. Yeah,
so I identified the shot that I want to work on with Roland. Roland's working on
there's that hallway shot. That's actually the final version of that, and then again the final version of this living room scene where the wall blows up. We need to add some footage to those walls and all of that.
The point is that every one of those shots really needed to be affected in basically the same way, right? So we've got a lot of work to do, and I don't want to have to sit here and go through all those shots myself. I mean, there's really a lot
about
to get
efficiency
done.
and working quickly, and that's why it's a great chance to talk about Autodesk Flare, and that's why we have Will here. So Will is going to be demonstrating Flare for us live, but I thought first to be a good idea to talk a little bit about what Flare is. You know, put simply, Flare is an extension of the Flame toolset. It's a software-only version of that batch compositing environment. And that means you have some flexibility in how you install it, what workstation, where you deploy it within your facility. Whereas Flame is a full turnkey creative station. The idea you get the performance, the speed, everything you expect from a Flame. Flare provides those same creative tools, again, as a software-only version. So you can really install it on whatever workstation within a few certified workstations, but there's some flexibility there. And we have people even using this product even in on-set workflows and things like that. So really being able to expand out that Flame tool set. Now, we thought a great example here was to talk about how this could change how you maybe bid a job. And if you think about this shot, Bill really highlighted the fact that it's a very complicated project that we're working on. So let's imagine when you go to bid this job, you break it down and you say there are about 16 different effect shots, 16 things we have to work on. Well, then your task, if you're the producer or you're the Flame artist working on it, you're going to figure out how much time it's going to take you to do every one of those composites. And for our example, let's say we decided it's going to be about 38 hours to get through that entire spot. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, if we've got one Flame and Bill, we're going to tie him up, we're going to tie that Flame room up, we're going to tie our premier room in our facility up for about 38 hours. Now, there are lots of different things we could use as sort of assistant tools or third-party applications or things like that, but none of those really provide that same Flame creative tool set like Flare does. The idea behind Flare is that you have those same tools, and if you put the right artist on it, and we believe Will is the right artist for this job, you can take that 38-hour job and essentially split it in half. And because of the flexibility in Flare, you could even deploy it to do something like this. Now, it's not going to exactly break down to 9.5 hours to figure out every little bit and piece of each of these composites. But again, the idea is now you're spreading it across multiple workstations and really getting through that job faster. So if you're in a facility, this is a great way to really take on more work or to maybe get through a tough job faster. And you know, this idea of expanding capacity is exactly what motivated Bond Edit in New York to purchase Flare recently. They were one of our first customers, and we spoke to them recently before the show. And I just got a little excerpt from that video just to listen from them and listen in their own words about why they chose Flare to expand their creative capacity.
The main reason Bond bought Flare was because we knew that we had a couple projects coming in that were going to just monopolize the Flame's time, and we were worried about being able to deliver on time for all these projects. So we looked into running the Flame around the clock. We didn't think that that was going to be even enough time for these projects. And then we looked into renting a Flame. The difference is that the Flare being like a fifth of the cost of the Flame, but I can still use it almost like a Flame. We call it a Flame and a half. That's how we describe it. You know, you can run it off of the local drives, you can pull it off of the network storage and put it on your local storage and run it locally that way, so you're kind of working totally independent and then push things back together again.
Flare more or less gives us an additional seat on our existing Flame. You could see it as a standalone product, but for us, it's basically taking the batch from our existing Flame and just cloning it out to another workstation. Not just passing shots off, you know, partial shots off to another person to cut mats or, you know, roto scenes. I'm giving them full shots to do on their own, completely on their own within the Flare software.
With Flare, the difference is we can work on two separate projects at the same time or the same project, the same medium at the exact same time. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility, which we didn't have before. Obviously, there's a lot of good creative shops out there. I think Bond is one that the people want to go the extra mile, and we're always trying to come up with something new and individual or unique for the client. And so I think we've gotten very good at bringing those ideas to life.
So that's a great example. It's really about flexibility. They said it better than we can say it there. So let's take a look and see how this actually works together. Now, if we can see Flame and Flare, guys, great. So we're seeing Flare here, and this is what Will's going to run. And what he's going to do is not launch to an independent project. He's not going to work with a standalone set of storage, pulling media over. He's actually going to log remotely into the same project that the Flame is working on. So they're going to share that same media and those same clips. You can also see that when Will launches into Flare, what is he presented with? Well, it's that batch compositing environment. Flare doesn't have the same desktop as Flame, doesn't have the video I/O tools, things like that. That's really what Flame's all about, driving that whole job. Flare's purely about that creative tool set, and that tool set is all presented through batch. So Will, you want to show us what you're working on there?
Yeah, I'm actually just prepping for my assignments for the day. And if I look into my library here, you'll be able to see that I can see the shots that have been assigned to me. And if I just go straight away and start pulling this together, you can see that I'm quite at home here in the tools of batch. So I'm just going to literally just pull out an action node here, and we'll start this shot in particular. you
And
can
that's
see that.
important to note that Will's pulled out that full action node. This is the full action that's in Flame. This isn't there's no nasty little limitations between these two products. It's really giving that full creative tool set.
Yeah, and I'm going to need it right now because you can see that one of the challenges of this shot is tracking. If I use traditional tracking here, I'm really going to have a problem getting a good result with these different points in time. So if I wanted to just pick points here and get what might be a good track on this back wall here, I may well come unstuck and those tracks might fall off. So that's not going to work for me. But I have a tool here called the 3D Tracker that you saw Bill using earlier. So this is Flame's tools. Flame's 3D Tracker right here inside of Flare. And I'm able to just go ahead and analyze this. And this is a really great tool. You saw me playing with those walls that were set into a corner. Not only does this pick tons of trackers for me to work with, but it also allows me to actually go through here and produce a camera. So then when I actually tie in my walls here to the corner is what I'm going to do, you'll see that it's just going to work. It's just going to track in. So this is one of the good tools of the system. So if we go in and we actually pick a couple of points here, create my axis, this is the same process that you saw Bill working on, except this is to serve compositing.
So again, the idea that you're getting this full creative tool set. So this is really what separates Flare, I think, from any other competition that you might think about using with your Flame. I mean, you're not talking about just a roto tool or just a masking tool or just a keying tool. You're talking about being able to do whatever you need to. So if you have a creative challenge like needing to track this, you're not talking about having to go to an external 3D tracking application. You're using Action with all of that built in.
Yep. I'm actually going to go in here, just place these walls as you can see, and I've just tied those into the corner. So then it's simply a case of just dialing them in scale and position here, just to really line it up. Let's just rotate this around a little bit. And as I just lock this into place, I can start to play with this, and you'll see how it's dropped in there. So then the next step for me would simply be to go ahead and reposition these walls. I'm going to use my bilinear tools here.
While you're working on that, I'll just point out again, just to really hit this point home, you can see here's the Flame. And Bill, you're already started on that that hallway shot.
I'm on the hallway shot.
Yep.
All right, well, let's go ahead and, Will, we're going to leave you alone. We'll check in on you in a few minutes. Looks like you got things coming together there on it. And we'll come back over to Bill. Okay. And you were going to take a look at that hallway shot. So again, Flare, a great way to extend that creative tool set out. If you put a Flame artist on it, like Bond said, it's like a flame and a half in your facility. You can really push more jobs through, get more work done a lot faster. Now, Bill, we're going to kind of revisit this shot because at the beginning we talked about bringing in an FBX model from Maya. So the first thing you did is you got that 3D track and you sent it into your CG pipeline, and now you're actually starting to see the first bits of results coming back from the CG pipeline into your compositing environment.
It's as easy as importing this time the FBX from Maya, and you can see I get all the little bits and pieces of this particular scene. And I also get them with animation, so you can see that the animation of the door flying off, which was recreated in 3D by Roland, will actually be something that I can go in and work with here in Flame.
And just to remind everybody, what's really cool about this is the idea that we've got our whole facility attacking this project. So Roland, you're working on some of those elements there for the hallway. You've also got that in shot you're going to work on for us. Will, you're just about finished with that shot. I know you've got another one you've got to do some work on.
I am, yep.
And Bill's still working in Flame. So it really breaks that linear process of getting through a job like this. You can get work done faster, you can take more work on, you can do more complicated work.
So back here in the Flame, I'm going to go ahead and disable the wireframe view. I just wanted to show you, I dropped a primitive into the scene. This is just a teapot. I'm going to go ahead and scale that up and reposition it just so that you can see that the teapot is just sitting in the center of the scene, and we've got our camera that's going to actually be creating the illusion that's scaling up. But it sits very well into our environment there. Now, instead of using the teapot, let's just give you an idea of how things are working in the scene, I'm going to use some of the game footage that we see here. I'm going to use that now as a texture projector. So we'll drop a projector into the scene, and this time we can move that back. I'll also move it up so you can see what's going on. And notice that as it starts to hit those 3D walls, it's going to wrap around and contort and basically go across the walls to create the effect that we're going for. And if I start to change the blending mode, if I multiply that with the walls, you can see that it's going to actually integrate that footage very nicely into our scene. Now, the thing that I've done is I've spent a little bit more time on this. We've also used some garbage mass to reveal. So this time we're using garbage mass to reveal those on. But the next issue I just want to highlight is that the walls don't really look very realistic. They have the original cracks in the walls from the shoot. But if I wanted to, I could start to enhance that using, again, some extended 3D tools here in Flame.
Yeah, this is... Oh, sorry, that's loud. Wow, this is another example of some of those creative tools really being brought into that environment too. So this is the substance noise generator.
That's
and
right.
the idea here is it's a procedural pattern generator. What's cool about this is it also has things like these behaviors. You can create patterns. You can actually modify these. You can create your own patterns. And this is a great way to interact with things. So maybe you wouldn't use this directly as a flat pattern in most cases, maybe if you need bricks or you need cracks or something. But let's imagine you're making a rippling water surface on a 3D object. It's a great way to create that displacement pattern right inside of Flame.
That's right. And I'm just going to go ahead and scale this to the same size as our footage for the game footage. That's at 720p. So let's go ahead and make an adjustment there. And I'm going to combine that now using the logical operations, our mathematical operations within the software that will allow me to multiply or subtract and do all of these types of things with those two images. So once we do that, if we replace that back into our composite, you can see now we're going to have some bricks on the wall. And we can make that whatever we want. We could go back to our substance noise, change out the preset for something like cracks, something that would be a little bit more appropriate. And here we can go back to our parameters, start to play around with the size, enhance those, make them look a little bit more dramatic in our scene. And now when we go back into our composite, we're going to see some cracks on the wall. So again, great to not have to burden my 3D department to generate something like that. I can do it myself here in Flame.
Yeah, speaking of your 3D department, I brought the 3-up view again just to check in on everybody. So Roland, you've got that in scene done. You've kicked off some renders for us, so we'll talk about those in a second. Will, you've actually moved on to another shot.
Yep.
And Bill, you're finishing up that one. So at this point, we really want to talk about what's happening next in that CG pipeline. So Roland, you sent some data back already, but you're also going to send some renders back. And the format that Roland's going to use to render that back is not just a flat RGB image. He's actually going to use an OpenEXR format. And the idea here, and you'll see this when it comes into Flame, is this is a great way to pass more than simple image data into your post-production pipeline. And it's really all about flexibility. So that one file or multi-pass files, you can render it as one file or multiple files. But what you're going to see is in addition to the final render, you're going to have all of this extra metadata included in there. So a normal pass for relighting, a vector motion pass contains some of that information. The matte passes, all of these different passes. And what that means is that Bill's going to have a lot more flexibility when he brings it in to do that final composite. So Bill, you want to show us that last shot there?
Yeah, so I've actually loaded up the beauty pass rendered in OpenEXR to show you sort of bringing this demo full circle. The original aerial shot that we started with, we 3D tracked that in Flame. We sent that camera data over to Maya, and Roland was able to use that camera, place these buildings, and render out in OpenEXR this particular layer. So you can see that it's
now
actually
we left this one.
matching.
We left the texture off of this, so it's a little more obvious what we're doing with some of the relighting here.
Yeah, exactly. So the texture isn't on there because I want to show you how the lighting will work. Now, what I'm going to do is go back to my library, and I'm going to grab the normals map. So this entire reel of result passes from Maya in OpenEXR render format will allow me to actually do some interesting things back here in Flame. These passes, even though they look a little odd, are actually have some relevance to the Flame software. So what I mean by that, if I delete this as an image pass and actually attach that same image as what's known as a normals map, what that's going to allow me to do is to stay true to the original 3D lighting conditions, but use Flame's lights to actually relight this scene. So you can see as I'm pulling Flame's lights into the scene, they're interacting with the surface of that 2D rendered image, but reacting as if I'm back in the 3D scene. If I move the light behind this billboard, it's actually going behind it. If I detach the normals map, you'll see that the same result does not happen.
Yeah, this is a great way to really save time because Roland doesn't want to have to re-render these frames just because you want to experiment with the light. That's going to take hours and hours of rendering in CG. That's really not what a CG application is designed for. That is what Flame is designed for, to really quickly interact with this. This could be motion blur. This could be a Z-depth pass. This could be lots of different things.
And as you saw in the final, there were lots of spotlights. We could actually start to turn our flame lights into spotlights, and we could start to create some sort of spotlight effects using that relighting through the normals map OpenEXR render.
Great. So I think that's a really good example. We've seen a lot of different work happening here. We've seen not just the metadata passing through the pipeline, but also the final image data in the form of those OpenEXR models. We've also seen Will and Bill working together with Flare and Flame working in a creative workflow, and really a lot of good creativity passing back and forth between these applications. So let's play the final one last time. Then we'll go right to our show reel from that, and we'll come back with another presentation.